let the torch of freedom burn.
President Thomas Jefferson said, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society, but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power."
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's WallBuilders Live, where we're talking about today's hottest topics on policy and faith and other areas of the culture. We always do that from a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. My name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach. I'm here with David Barton. He's America's premier historian and the founder of WallBuilders. Tim Barton is a national speaker and pastor and the president of WallBuilders. And all three of us are just thrilled that you're here with us on WallBuilders Live, because it tells us you're interested in knowing what to do in the culture, in our society, in this nation, how to use the freedoms that we've been given to do our part, fulfill our responsibilities that come with our rights. Everybody loves to talk about the rights under the Constitution, but what about the responsibilities? And if you're listening today, we know that you want to be a part of the solution. You want to fulfill those responsibilities. And so our goal is to equip and inspire, to entertain, yes, to have a fun program that's entertaining with lots of great information, but also to equip and inspire you. We want to make sure you have the tools you need to go out there and make a difference in your culture and in your society. If you want to help us do that and spread the word and reach more people, you can do that very simply by going to wallbuilderslive.com, click on the contribute button, and that's a great way to come alongside us. Those dollars, every time you make a contribution, it expands our voice. It allows us to reach more people through more stations, through more programs. We train pastors and young leaders. We train legislators. There's all kinds of things that we're doing with the dollars that you donate, and it helps to impact the culture in a positive way. You can become a force multiplier by going to the website today and making that contribution right there at wallbuilderslive.com. Okay, guys, let's dive into it. We've got several questions to get to today. We'll see how many we can get in. Our first question is going to come from, let's see, who do we have? This is Kenneth, and Kenneth's question is, he said, I was reading in Genesis 23, 1 through 16, and I was wondering why it was that Abraham insisted on paying for property to bury Sarah. The people, the sons of Heth, were willing to give Abraham the land for free. The sons of Heth considered Abraham a mighty prince among them. Was Abraham concerned if he received the land for free that later the sons of Heth would come back to Abraham with a "you owe us" for the free land? Help me to understand the reason Abraham insisted on paying for the land. I'm reading the Bible cover to cover. I've made it a goal of mine to read the Bible cover to cover yearly. More things are jumping out to me than last year. It's great. Thank you. I appreciate all you do. Ken from Washington State. P.S. I just finished reading Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers. I have a better understanding of why Texians have so much pride in Texas. Well, you're right on so many fronts, Ken, and I love the fact you're reading through the Bible once a year. It's one of the things I learned from David Barton 20 years ago, that the founders did that and made it a practice, and I'm like you. Every year when I read through, I keep seeing new stuff. David, Tim, what about this question and paying for the property as Abraham did?
There's a good answer to that and a historical answer or a historical example of the answer, but I want to go back for a second to reading through the Bible once a year. One of the founding fathers is a guy named Elias Boudinot, and Elias Boudinot is one of the founders of the American Bible Society. Now, significantly, he is the guy that was president of Congress when the Revolution ended, so he signed the peace treaty to end the Revolution with Great Britain. That's significant. He's a member of the first Congress. He helped frame the Bill of Rights, which is really significant. He's the first judge admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court bar. That's pretty significant. I mean, in other words, he's a big-name guy. We just don't know the name today. So here he is as a founder and the first president of the American Bible Society. And he, like most founders, started reading through the Bible cover to cover when he was much younger. And when he was 77 years old in helping found the American Bible Society, he wrote a piece, and it was to his daughter, and it was in response to Thomas Paine. But he sums it up and basically said, look, I've read through the Bible more than 50 times in my life. And he says, I still scarcely go through it that I do not find something new. So every time I read it, and it's like every time you read it, you're doing a deeper dive. You know, you go through math in the first grade, but in second grade, math is deeper, and in third grade, it's deeper, and in fourth grade, it's deeper. And that's the way the Bible is. Just because you go through it once doesn't mean you've got it. Oh, no, not by a long shot. So I really appreciate the fact that Ken's going through it year by year, and he will find deeper stuff every year. Now, going back to the question of Sarah and Abraham and property and why not just take it if they gave it, and it does go to the answer of if you own it, nobody can take it away from you. And Thomas Jefferson is one of the best explanations of this of any I know. If you go back to the founding era before Thomas Jefferson, if you go back to the Pilgrims and the Puritans, and you go back to John Davenport, who's one of the founders of Connecticut, and Thomas Hooker, a founder of Connecticut, and you go to all these founders, they bought those colonies from the Indians at the price set by the Indians. William Penn, Pennsylvania, he purchased it from the Indians, and the same with New Hampshire, and the same with Massachusetts, and the same with Massachusetts Bay Colony and Plymouth Colony, the same with Connecticut Valley and the New Haven Colony. Now, in the South, they largely did not purchase colonies, but in the North, they did. And so we're talking in the 1620s, 1630s, 1640s, 50s. By the time you get to the 1770s and 80s and 90s, we have a problem in that you have a whole lot more Indians, the descendants of those who signed the treaties, and they're getting short on land. And so Thomas Jefferson...
Short on land being relative in the sense of the land they used to own, because they could go further west.
That's right. That's true.
But no, this is, right, the land they want is what used to be their ancestors' hunting grounds and, right, their villages and their farms, and it was all sold, and we want, that land was awesome. We want it back. And you can make the argument they didn't understand the notion at the time, maybe of private property ownership in the sense of that these white settlers were going to build homes and never leave, right? That might not have been a thought they had, but this is where they're now seeing the property that used to be in their family. And instead of saying, let's just go west to where there's undeveloped territory, right, where there's not people there, they wanted back what had been in their family's history at some point previously.
And so what happens is, as there's so many more of them now in the 1770s and 80s and 90s and early 1800s, they're starting to fight to get that land back, but they sold it. And the settlers have the title deeds from their Indian forefathers who gave them that land, who purchased it, who sold it. And so Jefferson said, that's a lot of tension. They want their land back, but they can't get it back because they sold it. Now, it's different in the southern states. You get the Cherokees and the Trail of Tears and Andrew Jackson and et cetera. When you look down in the southern states, by and large, they weren't buying land the way they had generally done it in the northern states. And there were exceptions in South and North. But generally, in the North, they were very respectful of private property and purchased land. And in the South, it's, hey, the king gave it to us. You guys get off our land. So different mindsets, but that's with Abraham. It is once he owns the land, then anyone that comes after him in later generations, they don't have the standing to be able to take it back. They may disagree with the fact that it was sold to him, but the great-great-grandkids can't come in and say, give us our land. Well, it's not your land. I actually bought that land. So the concept of private property ownership is very big in the Bible, and it gives you a lot of protections. And that's why the biblically literate settlers that came to America, particularly those in New England who were Reformation students, they were really big into buying private property, respecting private property, owning private property. It belongs to the Indians. We can't live on it unless we get the title deed to it. Whereas in the South, it was much more socialistic, is, well, the king gave it to us. All you Indians get off it because it belongs to him. No, the Bible is what created that concept of private property ownership, and that of Sarah and Abraham and him wanting to own that property. That's one of the good examples of it in the Bible.
Well, what a fantastic example of combining that biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. I mean, it really does tie together, and it's the reason that our nation's been so blessed is because we learn from those biblical examples. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got more of your questions. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday, and you're listening to WallBuilders Live.
Abraham Lincoln said, "We the people are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who pervert the Constitution."
This is Tim Barton from WallBuilders with another moment from American history. In 1963, the United States Supreme Court decided that voluntary Bible reading could no longer be part of the school day. Founding Father Benjamin Rush, known as the father of public schools under the Constitution, pointedly warned that the Bible should be read in schools in preference to all other books. He specifically warned that if America ever ceased promoting biblical principles in schools, then we would waste so much time and money in punishing crimes and take so little pains to prevent them. He was right. We now have 7 million Americans in prison, on probation or on parole, and the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. Sadly, this was unnecessary, but is the result of no longer teaching the morals of the Bible in schools. For more information about the Founding Fathers' views on the positive impact of the Bible in schools, go to wallbuilders.com.
Thomas Jefferson said, the Constitution of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that it is their right and duty to be at all times armed, that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press.
We're back here on WallBuilders Live. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday, and if you'd like to get your question answered, be sure and send that into radio at wallbuilders.com. David, Tim, our next question is from Joe. It's about President Trump. He said, it's my understanding that President Trump suspended as much government funding of Planned Parenthood as he could. Yet I just read a report saying that this past year, Planned Parenthood received more government funding than ever before. How did that happen? Now, guys, I don't see in Joe's question what the report was or whether or not that's federal or state funding, so I'm not sure how to clarify that one for you. But in general, do you guys know if their kind of bottom line went up or down? I know I've read, and we've talked about on the program, all the different ways Trump has gone in and said, nope, not helping them anymore.
Yeah, here's the problem that they faced because, as I recall, the overall numbers, approximately 2/3 to 3/4 of their total funding came from government entities. So they're getting funding from federal governments, state governments, etc. Then states like Texas step in and say, well, we're not funding Planned Parenthood anymore. And the federal government steps in and says, well, we're not funding Planned Parenthood. So they stop all this. And yet Planned Parenthood didn't go under. They lose approximately 2/3, 3/4 of their funds. They're still here. How come? Because when Texas said, we're not going to, the city of Austin said, well, we're going to. And the city of Denton and Collin County said, well, we're going to. So Texas came back last year and passed a law that says, by the way, not only Texas, but none of the political subdivisions in Texas can fund that. So Georgia can pass a law that funds Planned Parenthood, but Atlanta's going to say, not us, we're going to defund it. And Alabama can say, well, we're going to stop it. And Birmingham says, well, we're going to fund it. So what you find is the very blue areas and very red states stepped up and said, we'll fund it. And that's why states like Texas came back and had to pass laws. Now, the other states really haven't done what Texas has done yet. But Texas came in and said, we'll have no political subdivision anywhere in the state doing this. And then on the federal level, while he directly defunded Planned Parenthood, there are still tons of grants that are out there. So Planned Parenthood just goes and competes for grants, and they'll win a grant from some lower level agency somewhere that gives them $10 million here and $20 million here and whatever. So they're still finding ways to keep that government funding coming, even though there has been so many efforts to defund. And the other thing is, in so many states, the federal judges stopped in and overturned the state law, whereas Missouri says, we're going to defund. The federal judge stepped in and said, no, you're not going to defund. So there's been a lot of noise about trying to defund, and there's been a lot of defunding that's happened. But there are so many other ways whereby those that are of a pro-abortion mindset do find ways to get government funds into Planned Parenthood coffers. So that's really the workaround that's happening, and that's why the bottom line appears that nothing's happened, even though President Trump has done everything he can to shut off federal dollars. It's all those grant and title programs that really keep them funded.
Well, and the good news is that all of those victories across the country, whether at the local level or at the federal level with the president in defunding Planned Parenthood, has made them scramble, and it kept them from increasing what they would have increased to, which always means more abortion. Every time you increase Planned Parenthood, it's going to be more abortion. You decrease Planned Parenthood, fewer abortions. So that's the thing to remember. And what this also means, David, is that folks at home, hey, fight on the local level. Don't just assume you elect a president that's good on an issue, that solves the problem. We have to be engaged at the local level, the state level. Price of freedom's eternal vigilance. And on this one of life, we should be fighting at every single level. Stay with us, folks. We got more questions coming up. You're listening to WallBuilders Live, and it's Foundations of Freedom Thursday.
President Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
Hey, friends, if you've been listening to WallBuilders Live for very long at all, you know how much we respect our veterans and how appreciative we are of the sacrifice they make to make our freedoms possible. One of the ways that we love to honor those veterans is to tell their stories here on WallBuilders Live. Once in a while, we get an opportunity to interview veterans that have served on those front lines, that have made incredible sacrifices, have amazing stories that we want to share with the American people. One of the very special things we get to do is interview World War II veterans. You've heard those interviews here on WallBuilders Live, from folks that were in the Band of Brothers to folks like Edgar Harrell that survived the Indianapolis, to so many other great stories you've heard on WallBuilders Live. You have friends and family that also serve. If you have World War II veterans in your family that you would like to have their story shared here on WallBuilders Live, please email us at radio@wallbuilders.com. radio@wallbuilders.com. Give us a brief summary of the story, and we'll set up an interview. Thanks so much for sharing here on WallBuilders Live.
Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down for mischief by the chains of the Constitution."
Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. It's Foundations of Freedom Thursday. Today, we're taking your questions, and the next one's going to come from Bill in Tallahassee, Florida. He said, can a person who is not a lawyer be a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court? This question came from the Constitutional Live series on the courts at our local library. It got me thinking because a professional architect won election over a professional real estate appraiser for the position of county property appraiser in the county next door. If a person other than a lawyer can be a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, I nominate David Barton to be our next Supreme Court justice. I second that nomination, Bill. Keep up the good work with WallBuilders Live on the radio. Onward. Now, Bill, great question, and he's one of our coaches. He teaches Constitutional Live multiple times a year. Great question. Only thing is, I don't think David wants to move to D.C., so if he were to be nominated, he would probably say no. Actually, no. I think you would, sir.
That would be fun. Well, like electronically, I'll just sit at home and watch it on Zoom and just send my opinions in. Yeah. Interestingly enough, there is no constitutional requirement for law school, for previous judgeships. There's no judicial experience required. That is not a constitutional requirement at all. And when you look at, for example, what's your judicial disposition, I can't tell you how many numbers of Supreme Court justices have never been a judge before being on the Supreme Court. That's their first experience as a judge on the Supreme Court. Now, when you look back over all the justices on the court, as it turns out, it appears that nearly all of them have been attorneys, although back in the founding era, a lot of them were self-taught attorneys. So they didn't go to law school. They just sat down and read the law books and became a member of the bar, and so they're essentially considered attorneys, but it's not the way we make attorneys today. So they would be home-studied kind of attorneys that taught themselves the law and were able to practice the law and could go into court and argue the law because they'd studied it. So from the sense of having a constitutional requirement, no, nothing there. You're not required to be an attorney. You're not required to have judicial experience or judicial temperament or anything else we talk about today. You're one of three branches. You need to know the Constitution, understand it, and that was the biggest deal, was that constitutional understanding. But throughout history, it appears that most of the Supreme Court justices have been attorneys in some way or the other, even if it's self-taught kind of attorney.
All right, guys, quick break. We got one more question on Foundations of Freedom Thursday, so you better stay with us. We'll be right back on WallBuilders Live.
Samuel Adams said, "The liberties of our country and the freedom of our civil constitution are worth defending against all hazards, and it is our duty to defend them against all attacks."
Hi, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders, and I want to encourage all the pastors out there with the unique opportunity that we're presenting at WallBuilders. We're doing a special tour just for pastors that you can come and learn more about the spiritual heritage of our nation. Not just seeing the sites, but understanding the significance of what they are and what they represent. We get to go through the Capitol at night, and we get to see the spiritual heritage of our founding fathers, of who we are as a nation, where we came from. We bring in congressmen that'll tell you about current legislation, about our religious liberties and freedom, and what's going on in Washington, D.C. If you're a pastor, or if you want to recommend your pastor for this trip, you can go to our website, www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a link that's for scheduling. If you click on that link, there's a section for pastor's briefing. There's more information about the dates, when it's going, how it's going to happen. If you want to know more about our nation, our religious liberties, our freedom, our spiritual heritage, this is a trip you want to be a part of.
Calvin Coolidge said, "The more I study the Constitution, the more I realize that no other document devised by the hand of man has brought so much progress and happiness to humanity. To live under the American Constitution is the greatest political privilege that was ever accorded to the human race."
We're back on WallBuilders Live, Foundations of Freedom Thursday. Final question of the day comes from a 15-year-old student. Here's the email. "Hello, I'm a 15-year-old student. First, I want to say how much I love WallBuilders. Just stop for a second, pause, guys. Let's enjoy this moment. Teenagers loving WallBuilders is awesome. I just think that's cool that it appeals to young people to want to know the truth. Okay, anyway, this 15-year-old student said, "You're one of the best Christian ministries in the world." Hey, I like that statement too. "Recently at my school, I saw an advertisement for the local Muslim club. On the advertisement, there was a sentence saying, 'All faiths welcome.' This eventually led to a discussion with a Muslim student telling me Muslims and Christians worship the same God. I also know the Pope has said exactly that. I know Islam is a false religion, but my question is, why do various religious clubs advertise all faiths are welcome? Specifically, why do Christian clubs do this? And also, why do some Christians believe Yahweh is Allah? And where did this misguided belief come from?" 15-year-old student, since I don't have your name here, patriotacademy.com. We want you there. And you need to go to High Point this summer, hpoint.org. You're exactly the kind of student we're looking for. There's the fact that these questions would come to your mind and you'd have the boldness to ask them. All right, David, Tim, this whole all faiths welcome, is that some kind of constitutional requirement that if you have a club on a high school campus, you have to allow all faiths into your club?
Yeah, there's no requirement to allow all faiths in. One of the things that actually has been upheld in many court decisions is that you're allowed to have guidelines that follow the beliefs of the club. And so we've seen this, for example, on college campuses with fraternities, with sororities, with Christian organizations. And it's very much true on high school campuses as well. There are limitations that you're supposed to allow people to come. But when it comes to selecting officers, that's where it would be different. You can have officers selected that meet the criteria that you set. But the notion that all religions are equal comes from really, really poor theology. That is what we would call a lack of apologetics. And so apologetics are where we get the idea of defense of our faith. Apologetics comes from the word apologia, which is ultimately where Paul talks about he was put here for defense of the gospel. That's that word apologia, meaning defense. The apologetics of the gospel is kind of that line of thought. And religions are not all equal, and we do not all worship the same God. But when you don't know what your faith is, you don't recognize that it's different than somebody else's, and you don't know what their faith is, you don't know that it's different than yours. And I have no problem saying that we invite everybody to come to our church, and we're an outspoken Christian church where I attend church. Everybody can come to our church, but when you come to our church, we're not going to pretend like all faiths and all religions are equal. We're going to say, nope, we believe that there is one God, creator of the universe, in the sense of, right, the Father, although in him are three parts, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And we believe that his son is Jesus Christ. I mean, right, we're not going to sacrifice or compromise our theology for somebody else to be there, but we would love for you to come and learn what we believe and why we believe it. And actually, we think we have the best reason for believing what we believe, which is why we think it's great for you to believe that as well. The idea that you have to pretend that all faiths are equal on a high school campus is really kind of a silly position, and it shows that people don't really know what that faith is about.
But there's another step to that, and you set it up, Tim, in the sense that, notice that back in the question he says, the Muslim club said all faiths are welcome, and he went from there. This is taught as one of the evangelism tools of Muslims, is you build bridges with other religions, but they're very specifically taught the bridges only go in one direction. They're for them to come to us, not for us to come to them. And so what you do is you make a show that, oh yeah, your God is our God. Oh, we all believe the same thing. And that gets you by the thing of, wait a minute, you guys are the ones that are doing all the stuff in the Middle East and all over Africa and in Indonesia. That doesn't look real good. No. We've got the same God. And so this really is this pluralism kind of aspect, this coexist with all faiths aspect, is we want you to lay down your beliefs so that you can start moving toward us, and then we can get you on into us. So it is really an entry-level kind of a tool, and those we've had even on this program, those who have been very active and very deep in the Muslim faith, very high up in it, Muslim Brotherhood, etc., after they become Christians, they say, well, yeah, I know that's what they say, but I used to teach this. I know it. I was trained in it. I was one of the leaders, and this is why we say that. And so this is an outreach tool, and it is not a tool of equality. Now, I would say, and this is just kind of being facetious with the term, I don't think Islam is a false religion. I think it's very real because 21% of the world is dealing with it. But in the sense of theologically, yeah, I think theologically it's a wrong religion. But in the sense of they're very genuine, they're very real, and what they believe has very genuine consequences. And so what they try to do is say, oh yeah, Yahweh and Muhammad, same thing. No, it's not. But that's the way to get your walls down and get you moving in their direction. And that's why it's so significant that the Muslim Club said all faiths are welcome. That's an evangelistic tool.
There are more programs available right now at wallbuilderslive.com. You can click in the archive section there. If you're a podcast listener, download those podcasts throughout the week. We have great interviews like the one today with President Munsell from Arizona Christian University, as well as with U.S. senators and congressmen and attorneys that are arguing before the Supreme Court, and individuals just like yourself that are making a difference in their communities, that are some of our Constitution coaches out there that host classes, biblical citizenship classes in their churches, and use the materials that WallBuilders makes available for all kinds of educational opportunities. So all kinds of ways that you can be a part of the solution. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, one of the easiest ways, and most important, is through dollars. Yes, finances, lives, fortunes, sacred honor. Sound familiar? Right there in the Declaration of Independence, fortunes was a big part of it. Yes, we've got to invest our dollars in freedom, and one of the best places you can do that is right here at WallBuilders. WallBuildersLive.com. Click on the contribute button. A lot of our folks across the nation give $5 or $15 or $25 a month. Whatever you can do, we greatly appreciate that support. It helps us to expand, reach more people across the nation, and therefore be a part of the solution in saving our constitutional republic for future generations. God bless you. Hope you enjoyed listening today. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
Thomas Jefferson said, "The constitutions of most of our states and of the United States assert that all power is inherent in the people, that they may exercise it by themselves, that is their right and duty, to be at all times armed, and that they are entitled to freedom of person, freedom of religion, freedom of property, and freedom of press."
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting.